We will be continuing with Chapter 3 of The Ultimate Evil and Investigation of America's Most Dangerous Satanic Cult. Knock on Coffins. March 8th, 1977, a Tuesday, the first faint scent of spring tantalized New York as temperatures crept to the high 60s, signaling the coming end of a long and bleary winter whose February blizzards piled deep, frosted blankets of snow throughout a glazed and desolate metropolitan area. For all its life in other seasons, New York in winter evoked the specter of an ancient gray freighter ice-locked in a barren harbor, creaking, shuddering, rusting, and waiting for the April thaw. Unlike some of its volatile adjoining neighborhoods, the enclave that was Forest Hills boasted a low crime rate, and its affluent residents were determined to keep it that way. The fact that the police investigation of Christine's death was seemingly stalled in low gear tainted the locality with a sense of apprehension and a bitter taste of vigilance. John Deal, backtending bar at Ridgewood 3, was, he knew, once considered a possible suspect in the murder of his girlfriend, and was the unknown psychopath. There were, as mentioned, other possible suspects too, but none of that would matter. At 7 o'clock in the evening of March 8th, the thermometer still hovered at a balmy 52 degrees as 18-year-old Amy Johnson lost her Forest Hills home on Exeter Street for a customary night jog in the company of her 13-year-old brother, Tony. Beginning her run less than 4 blocks from the scene of Christine Freund's murder, she traveled west to 69th Avenue, turned left, and continued south to the next block, Fleet Street. Turning east on Fleet, she and Tony trotted to the corner of a busy Continental Avenue, where they again veered left, following a rectangular route back to their home. As Amy jogged north on the Continental to the corner of Dartmouth, the image of the Freund homicide formed in her mind, and she involuntarily glanced across Station Plaza, where the murder occurred 5 weeks before. Especially wary of strangers since that night, Amy looked back at her left and saw a young man standing by a small play area in the corner of Continental and Dartmouth. Now, as he stared at the approaching Amy, his eyes studied her in what she termed an eerie, threatening manner, and she became alarmed. He had wavy, dark hair combed straight back, and his hands were jammed into the pockets of the beige 3/4 length raincoat he was wearing. He stood about 6 feet tall and weighed approximately 175 pounds. Unknown to Amy, this same man was loitering in the area before her arrival. He frightened another young girl, Peg Benson, just minutes earlier. Now, as he glared at Amy, she shivered and quivered her pace, passing him and turning east onto Dartmouth Street. Off the sidewalk, she kept to the middle of the narrow road and gestured to her younger brother to do the same. Together, they maintained a hurried gait down Dartmouth Street, which was linked with Tudor-style and stucco buildings and dimly lit by turn-of-the-century-type street lamps. When Amy and Tony reached Tennis Place near the stadium, they swung left and aimed toward Exeter Street, their own block. They would be home in a few moments. Incredibly, at the corner of Exeter and 70th, she again spied the same man standing on the sidewalk, and again he was staring at her. How did he get there, she wondered. Although she'd been running all the while, he somehow managed to get in front of her and was waiting for her to pass. Did he drive, or had someone driven him ahead of her? Now very frightened, she and her brother ran even faster, They scurried past the man who made no movement and safely reached the front of their home. Catching her breath, Amy looked around and saw that the stranger was walking away, heading east on Exeter toward Tennis Place and Dartmouth. It was about 7:25 p.m. Virginia Voskerichan, Virginia Voskerichan was late coming home from Columbia University in Manhattan. It was nearly 7:30 when she climbed the subway stairs at the Continental Avenue stop in Forest Hills and began the short hike to her house at 6911 Exeter Street. Walking south on Continental to Dartmouth, she turned right and began striding west on the same route her neighbor, Amy Johnson, had followed just 15 minutes before. Virginia, 19, had long, wavy hair. She was attractive, well-liked, and currently dating one of her Columbia teachers, a 27-year-old Russian language assistant named Vladimir Lunis. Virginia was born in Bulgaria and emigrated to the United States with her parents. Her brother and sister at the age of 11, an intelligent girl, she soon mastered her adopted tongue and was officially welcomed as an American citizen on July 29, 1975, a year to the day before the murder of Donna Laria in the Bronx. After 2 years at Queens College, Virginia transferred to Barnard College at Columbia, where she was a B+ student majoring in Russian and planning a career in political science. As she walked to her home, she carried a calendar and some school books in her arms. As she neared 4 Dartmouth Street, an apartment house, Virginia noticed a short, youngish-looking figure in a watch cap and sweater approaching her from the opposite direction. As Virginia and the youth closed to within 5 feet of each other, she moved slightly to her right to allow the stranger to pass on her left side. Then, for the briefest of moments, everything froze. Realizing at the end that her life was in mortal danger, Virginia cried out as she saw the gun pointing into her face. Desperately, she ducked and frantically raised the school books to her face to ward off the coming attack. When the killer fired, the bullet ripped through the textbooks and entered Virginia's head on the left side of her upper lip, knocked out several teeth, tore through her skull, and lodged in the base of her neck, cracking vertebrae. Slain instantly by the .44 slug, Virginia pitched sideways into the row of hedges fronting for Dartmouth. Down Dartmouth Street, back in the direction from which he'd come, the killer ran. At the corner of Dartmouth and Tennis Place, the gunman pulled the watch cap over his face as he hurtled by a startled Ed Marlowe, a 59-year-old civil engineer. "Oh, Jesus," the killer explained, covering his youthful features with the cap, but Marlowe had seen the face, if only briefly. The person looked to be only about 16 to 18 years of age, was stocky built, clean-shaven, and wore a ski jacket or sweater and a cap, which was either brown or blue and striped. He appeared to be about 5'7". Now it happened. Someone in the NYPD either panicked, manipulated, or stretched opinion to merge with fact. Whichever the result would have a profound impact on the public's perception of the case for years to come. Who actually endorsed the decision is still not known with certainty, but it bore the imprimatur of the Queen's Detective Command and highest officials in the police department, as well as that of the mayor of the city of New York. At the pyramid's pinnacle, where the new chief of detectives, John Keenan, the police commissioner, Michael Codd, and Mayor Abram Beam, who was facing a doomed-to-die re-election campaign, somewhere in alliance, which would later enlist Deputy Inspector Timothy Dowd, who many regarded as a career bureaucrat. The answer lies today, for it was this group acting on information gleaned from the ballistics unit that created the .44 caliber killer, subsequently known as Son of Sam. Together, they misled the press and populace and stoked a panic they stoked the panic the likes of which New York has never seen. To be sure, there absolutely was reason for great alarm, because some unknown force was definitely gunning down young girls in Queens and the Bronx, but the authorities would now package opinion about the .44 revolver and label it as fact. They would inflate the ballistics findings. As a result, they would underestimate the menace, and in doing so, they would box themselves in on the .44 caliber killings and their aftermath, a scenario that would include the death of many more young people, innocent and culpable alike. This isn't a detective answer. This isn't a definitive answer for why it happened. What was known unequivocally in March of 1977 was that the police department was in the midst of a serious moral crisis. Since 1971, the Knapp Commission corruption scandals, the detective division, once regarded as fiefdom in the NYPD, had seen its elite ranks dwindle from 3,000 to 1,800 when Son of Sam began to march through the city streets. In fact, no policeman had advanced to the detective corps between 1974 and mid-1976, and promotions were scant for those already there. Procedural changes and budget cuts were responsible for the trimming, adding to the department's disenchantment. The city had laid off some 1,700 cops as it struggled to emerge from the fiscal mire. What all this meant is that the NYPD was dismayed at its sinking status and an absence of recognition and public support. The department sorely needed a shot in the arm, or maybe a shot from the character arms. On March 9th, the day after the Foscari chain shooting, the newspapers and television stations accurately reported that the police logically were tracking a chubby teenager in a ski or watch cap as the prime suspect in the crime. This was Ed Marlowe's suspect, who attempted to hide his face from the surprised witness as he fled. Other neighborhood residents also spotted this individual lingering in the area shortly before the slaying. And although the incident occurred barely a block from the Freund homicide, police told the New York Times there was no evidence to positively link the two killings. Excuse me. That was true, but it was also one of the last of the police department's concise statements about the .44 case. None of the following was ever revealed to the public, but here is what happened. In the morgue, a large caliber deformer lead bullet, as stated in autopsy report, was extracted from the body of Virginia Foscari's chain. Although the slug passed through her buttocks and her head, cracked vertebrae and flattened considerably, police ballistics were still able to identify it as having been fired from a .44 caliber character arms bulldog revolver, again a relatively rare weapon in New York. The police now had evidence that a .44 revolver was used in all the assaults, and that a Charter's arms bulldog model was used in at least 2 or 3 of them, and they had legitimate investigatory reasons to believe the attacks were related, given the common circumstances of each. But one gun and one gunman they did not have. There was no certain positive match between the Valkyrie bullet and those recovered at virtually all the previous 44 shootings due to the deformed condition of those bullets. In other words, the police had no irrefutable proof that the same gun was used in all the incidents. More importantly, they had even less evidence to demonstrate that the same individual acting alone committed the crimes. In fact, they had accurately considerable data which indicated that the opposite was likely. The composites drawn from the Lauria, Lomino de Masi, and Valkyrie shootings, there would be two people sought in the Valkyrie case, showed that at least 3 and possibly 4 persons were involved. This information held regardless of whether or not the same 44 was used each time. A police claim of a ballistics match is not an indisputable edict, and such determinations are vulnerable to courtroom challenges. Aware of this, the NYPD recommends that the 2 technicians concur before accepting a finding. It is not known if that procedure was followed in the 44 caliber case, or if the ballistics lab was pressured. For all the benefits of ballistics, it is an inexact science which often calls for conclusions rather than final statements of fact. Like fingerprints, ballistics evidence has become sacrosanct to many minds. Not true. A cliché in crime dramas, fingerprints, for example, are often effectively useless as investigative aids. A perpetrator would have to leave behind a fair number of clean prints before law enforcement computers could identify an unknown suspect. 1, 2, even 3 prints are simply not enough. However, when a suspect is under scrutiny, fingerprints become important because at that time, a particular individual's prints can be compared with any number found at a crime scene. With a suspect in mind, fine. Otherwise, no, unless he leaves a sufficient number behind and his prints are on the file in the first place. New technology available in some jurisdictions is enabling police to work with fewer samples, but the equipment has not yet been installed throughout the country. As for ballistics, a bullet recovered at a typical New York shooting scene or in a hospital or morgue is forwarded to the NYPD's ballistic lab. There, on the premise that no 2 gun barrels are precisely identical, the bullet is analyzed microscopically and compared with a clean bullet which has been fired into a tank of water from a suspected gun. The bullets pick up tiny unique marks from inside the gun's barrel, and they are fired, making it sometimes possible for them to be matched to a particular weapon. As with fingerprints, the job is infinitely easier if a suspected firearm is available from which to obtain a clean bullet via the water tank for comparison purposes. However, in the 44 caliber shooting, there was no such gun in police custody. The killer still had it. Thus, any comparisons had to be attempted through analysis of the bullets recovered from the 5 crime scenes or from the victims' bodies. These bullets were all deformed. Similarities did exist, and indeed they would exist in any number of Charters Arms 44 caliber bulldogs manufactured in the same place, perhaps even with the same machines. In fact, due to a manufacturing quirk, the bulldog produced an unusual right 6 twist because Charter Arms, in boring its barrels in 24-inch lengths, clamped one end while the other hung free. So, as the cutter trimmed the barrel, to the actual length that would be part of the gun, it vibrated slightly, leaving an impression that would be picked up by bullets fired through it. But this trait was peculiar to the Bulldog revolver itself, not to only one particular Bulldog. Out of 17 bullets fired in the attacks, the comparison effort was narrowed to the projectile which killed Donna Lauria and the single bullet fired at Virginia Valcaricane. The other 15 slugs must have been useless if they hadn't been. A match could have been obtained much sooner. And in light of what the police were about to announce, that point, which concerns the Denario Lomino de Masi and Freund shootings, is a relevant one. Years later, NYPD ballistics detectives George Simmons would say the gun wasn't in good shape, so matches were hard. Queens District Attorney John Santucci would phrase it differently. Based on reports we later obtained from the police department, the bullets were similar, but weren't conclusively matched. Maybe the same gun was used, maybe not. In terms of evidence, the reports were inconclusive. On March 10th, 2 days after the Valcaricane murder, the police and Mayor Abraham Beam convened a press conference to publicly state there was a ballistics match between the Lauria and Valcaricane bullets. In other words, that both were fired from the same, to the exclusion of all others, .44 revolver. It was possible the same gun was used in those attacks, but even if that was so, there was no evidence to lay the murders at the doorstep of a single individual acting alone. The officials would further allege that although test results weren't as definite, meaning no match at all, in the Denaro, Lomino de Masi, and Freund cases, they were nonetheless certain that the same gun fired by the same man was also used in those attacks. The press conference was held at the 112th Precinct Station House in Forest Hills, where Codd and Beam proclaimed the birth of the .44 caliber killer to an anxiously awaiting world. Represented by every newspaper, television, and radio reporter who could wheel his or her way to Queens on that chilly afternoon, there was yet another surprise in store. Codd and Beam took pains by implication to impart the message that the .44 fiend was not the man in the ski or watch cap, so far as they knew, a position they would sorely regret taking 5 months later. Oh, ski cap was still wanted for questioning, but carefully couching his words, Codd revealed that his men were primarily seeking a white male, about 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, wearing a beige raincoat, and with dark hair combed straight back. This, police knew, but the public didn't, was the man who frightened jogger Amy Johnson and Peg Benson shortly before the shots were fired. The statement of the two girls were kept under wraps, where they remained until this writing. Here is what the citizens of New York and consequently the nation were told. From the New York Times, Mayor Beam and Police Commissioner Codd, in a joint appeal to the public for help, disclosed yesterday that the police were seeking the same man for the senseless killings of 3 young women since July 29th, including 2 recently from Forest Hills. The conclusion was based on ballistics examinations that showed the same .44 caliber revolver had been used for the 3 killings. The commissioner gave the following description of a person wanted for questioning in the murders. Male, white, between 25 and 30 years of age, between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet tall, medium build, well groomed, with dark hair combed straight back, However, when asked if this person was believed to be the murderer, Mr. Codd replied, "I can't say that he is a suspect." Then what was he? And what about Ski Cap? The press had the opportunity to pin Codd and Beam to the wall. Why were you hunting one guy yesterday, another today, and 2 people in total, Commissioner? And what about the other sketches that look so different from these descriptions? What makes you so sure one gun means one killer? If those questions were asked or answered candidly, the house of cards may have crumbled, and the 44 case might have assumed an entirely different dimension. From the Daily News, the man who killed co-ed Virginia Volkerchain on a Forest Hills, Queen Street last Tuesday also killed a woman in January less than 100 yards away, murdered a Bronx woman last July, and has wounded at least 2 other women in the city in the last 7 months. Mayor Beam and Commissioner Michael Codd disclosed yesterday. Ballistics established the same .44 caliber Wild West revolver had been used in all the 5 shootings, Codd said. Outside of the already mentioned misrepresentations of the .44 Bulldog wasn't exactly Wyatt Earp's type. It was a short-barreled weapon designed primarily for police use and had been available commercially since 1974. Why Codd described it as a long-barreled Wild West weapon is another possibly telling enigma. The truth that the police were making a judgment call remained a closed secret, and the media and public pressure soon gave the NYPD brass and the mayor what they wanted: a task force. Initially, the group was comprised of about 50 detectives and uninformed officers, a combination of the Bronx and Queens cops already working separately in the various investigations. At first, Captain Joseph Borelli was put in charge with Lieutenant John Power, a sergeant, and Sergeant Joseph Coffrey right behind him, but the case was getting too big for a captain, at least in the public appearance sense. A month later, after a number of officials turned down the assignment, Deputy Inspector Timothy Dowd, 61, was named to head the squad. Borelli, Coffey, and Power would remain and report to Dowd. With the mayor now involved, the case had become a hot political issue. The link with City Hall started the flow of money and manpower, but it also endangered pressure and interference. Beam was in a political dogfight. He wanted publicity. He wanted to be aligned with such an important case and known to the voters as the public servant whose personal intervention and concern cleared the path for a quick, efficient solution to the matter of this lengthening string of homicides being committed against young, white, middle-class residents of Queens and the Bronx. March soon surrendered to April, and with April came spring weather and Easter on the 10th, and still the killer didn't resurface. Reporters routinely interviewed detectives, psychologists, and police supervisors involved in the probe. On a real-world level, the investigation was riding a rail to nowhere. By determining that the killings were all committed randomly, the police had dropped their probes of potential suspects with possible motives for the individual crimes. After all, a deranged individual had been doing all the shootings at random, right? And the deranged don't have real motives. And now, in search for the psycho, the police were at square one. No suspect, no motive, frustration. The investigation desperately needed some impetus. Impetus arrived in the early morning darkness of April 17, 1977, the Sunday after Easter. Prominently displayed in the living room of the large, tastefully furnished high-rise apartment at 1950 Hutchinson River Parkway in the Bronx Pelham Bay section. The impressive oil painting revealed a young, attractive girl in a formal, yet still soft and vulnerable pose, regularly resplendent in her gown. Perhaps someday she would become an actress. That was her ambition. At 19, Valentina Suriani had her vision, and she had no reason to believe that she wouldn't live to see it fulfilled. A 1976 graduate of St. Catherine's Academy, Valentina, daughter of political employee Frank Suriani, and his wife enrolled at the Bronx Lehman College to study her chosen profession. 5 feet 9 inches tall, Valentina had short brown hair, brown eyes, a lively temperament, and a strong will to succeed in her field. Outgoing with those she knew well, she was, like many people, theatrically inclined, still somewhat shy and insecure around strangers. In April 1977, she was seeking a photographer to capture her essence in the portfolio she'd need as a budding thespian. Valentina's boyfriend, Alexander Esau, 6 feet 1, was 20, but the long curly brown hair which framed his baby face made him appear to be about 16. The son of immigrant parents, she was employed as an operator's helper with Luna Brothers Towing Service in Manhattan. At 3 a.m. on April 17th, the young couple who'd been to a movie in Manhattan and later stopped at a party pulled up and parked along a chain-link fence on the west side of the darkened Hutchinson River Parkway service road opposite number 1878, about 2 blocks south of Valentina's home and less than a short city block from Jody Valentine's brick house on the same street. Out of the millions of people in New York and its thousands of roadways, Valentina and Alex would die within 4 blocks of Donna Lauria and less than 200 yards from where Donna's wounded friend lay sleeping. As the young couple embraced in the borrowed Mercury Montego, Alex was behind the wheel. Valentina nudged close to him and then sat on his lap with her legs stretched across the seat in the direction of the passenger's door. As the lovers kissed, Valentina was face to face with Alex. Then through the closed front passenger window, a .44 caliber bullet shattered the glass and smashed into Valentina above her left corner of her mouth, passed downward through the base of her neck, and exited below her right ear. Immediately, a second shot hit above her left ear, traveled downward through her brain, and lodged in the back of her skull on the right side. The shots came so rapidly, Valentina didn't have time to fall between them. Alex, meanwhile, tried to escape the roaring rampage. Reflexively, he attempted to drive away from the shots, but not being able to judge where the noise was coming from, he instead bent straight into the path of the next 2 missiles, both of which hit him in the top of his head and tore their murderous path into his brain. And then it was quiet. The 2 young lovers lay motionless in the car. Valentina was still sprawled on Alex's lap, and his upper body was slumped toward the passenger's door. Their blood was mixing together. Valentina was already dead, and Alex, despite a frantic effort to save him, succumbed hours later at the Bronx's Montefiore Hospital. With the morning light, old women from the row of brick homes across the street in this Italian neighborhood sadly carried buckets of water to the scene to wash away the horrors of the night before. It was a tender gesture made out of respect for the dignity of the dead couple, but nothing would eradicate the stain that was now spreading across New York. The gunman had been astonishingly accurate, even considering the close range. 4 fatal headshots were fired with a weapon known for its significant recoil. Who he was remained as who was who he was remained an agonizing mystery. But before he fled, he did something that he hadn't done before. He dropped a macabre calling card in the road beside the victim's car. It was an envelope addressed to Queens Detective Captain Joseph Borelli. Inside the envelope was a letter which gave the birth to the son of Sam. On Monday, April 18th, the New York newspapers screamed the return of the homicidal Night Stalker. Bronx girl shot to death in car, gun linked to 3 other slayings, read the banner headline in the Daily News. Underneath was a large photo of a smiling Alex and Valentina, both dressed formally for a prom or wedding. By the next day, the news, through its network of sources in the police department, learned that a letter was left at the scene. Killer 2 cops, I'll do it again. Taunting note is first solid clue. The paper shouted on page 1. Beneath the headline were 2 composite sketches, both from March's Volkerachen's murder. The drawings were of ski cap and the man wearing the beige raincoat, and the captain revealed that the 2 were being sought for questioning. The police already claimed only one man was behind the killings and were now publicly labeling Ski Cap a witness. At this point, it is reasonable to say that the man in the beige raincoat was David Berkowitz, as among other things, a comparison of the sketch and Berkowitz's photo clearly illustrates the strong resemblance. However, it is not so reasonable to say Ski Cap Man was a man. Ski Cap, a witness who never came forward, may well have been a woman. Something else was at play here. Not that the police were hiding otherwise, but the Borelli letter dropped at the Suriani Esau scene negated the presence of 2 people at the Volkerachen murder simply because it was ostensibly written by one person claiming credit for the slayings. The police wanted one man, then they'd have one man. The Daily News, quoting a police source, said the letter advised authorities that the murder lived in a nightmare world of blood-sucking vampires and Frankenstein monsters. The news also reported that the letter contained words in a Scottish accent and the phrase "too many heart attacks." The coronary wording would set police pouring through hospital records because they believed the killer's father might have been mistreated by brown-haired nurses after suffering a cardiac arrest, thus igniting his demented offspring into a murderous onslaught against brown-haired young girls. Moreover, Donna Loria was a medical technician and Jody Valentine a student nurse. This fueled the theory, although how police reconciled the killer's possible knowledge of the victim's professions in a supposedly random series of attacks was never explained. The letter also caused police to believe the killer attended Catholic schools, a point worthy of resemblance. The people of New York never knew why authorities entertained these thoughts because the note was withheld. The Daily News hadn't seen it either, and so the police were able to deny falsely that the assassin warned he would strike again. The rank and file members of the task force also didn't view the correspondence. Several have since stated Borelli and Dowd wouldn't show it to them, and those detectives were responsible for catching the killer. It was a very closed circle at the top. In any event, the withholding of the Borelli letter was a significant error because the note contained important clues which, if released, might have led to an arrest months and victims sooner. The letter, 4 pages in length, was printed in capitalized, slanted block letters. I am deeply hurt by your calling me a Wemon hater. W-E-M-O-N. Somebody can't spell. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a little brat. When Father Sam gets drunk, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Behind our house, some rest, mostly young, raped and slaughtered, their blood drained, just bones now. Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic too. I can't get out, but I look out the attic window and watch the world go by. I feel like an outsider. I am on a different wavelength than everybody else programmed to kill. However, to stop me, you must kill me. Attention all police, shoot me first. Shoot to kill or else. Keep out of my way or you will die. Papa Sam is old now. He needs some blood to preserve his youth. He has had too many heart attacks. Too many heart attacks. Ugh, me hoot, it hurts, sonny boy. I miss my pretty princess most of all. She's resting in Our Lady's house, but I'll she her son. I am the monster Beelzebub, the chubby behemoth. I love to hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat. The Weomen of Queens are the prettiest of all. I must be the water they drink. I live for the hunt, my life, blood for Papa. Mr. Borelli, sir, I don't want to kill anymore. No, sir, no more, but I must honor thy father. I want to make love to the world. I love people. I don't belong on earth. Return me to Yahoos. To the people of Queens, I love you, and I want to wish all of you a happy Easter. May God bless you in this life and in the next. And for now, I say goodbye and good night. Police, let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back, to be interpreted sick as bang, 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 bank, bang, ugh. You're in murder, Mr. Monster. If I'll be back isn't the equivalent of I'll do it again, then the NYPD is owed an apology. With regard to its other contents, the letter was loaded with salient leads, such as references to a house, garage, and attic, which implied a residential suburban-like location, an old man named Sam who drank and was beset with a heart condition, who was prone to violence, who had a family, and who apparently spoke with a Scottish-sounding accent. There also was an allusion to a dog and to a yard of some type behind our house. In addition, the letter clearly indicated that an attack had been planned to occur in Queens rather than the Bronx, and was to have been carried out the week before Easter, that is, A shooting scheduled for 7 days earlier in Queens was delayed and transferred to the Bronx. The evidence was at variance with the official psychological profiles of an obsessed murderer whose pent-up internal rage exploded unpredictably. If it had been released, there is every reason to believe, and without the benefit of hindsight, particularly in light of events which will be detailed later, that someone in the greater New York area might have read the letter and provided vital information about Sam and his murders. But no one, with the expectation of a handful of police officials and consulting psychiatrists, would see the correspondence, except for Jimmy Breslin, columnist for the Daily News. Breslin would slip in a July 28th column devoted to the anniversary of Donna Loria's death, when he would write that the killer, who referred to women as Wemon, W-E-M-O-N, might let the anniversary pass as he sat looking out his attic window. Direct references to the secret Borelli letter. Breslin would see a note the police brass wouldn't even share with the detectives working on the case. But perhaps the powers in the department thought it only fair to show Breslin their letter. After all, he was going to show them his. As Memorial Day neared, 6 weeks had elapsed since the murders of Valentina Suriani and Alexander Esau, but the police, now bolstered by a task force of more than 150 officers and detectives, were making no progress in the case. The investigation was centered on current and former mental patients, sex criminals who had demonstrated a hatred of women, and candidates culled from the growing list of suspects phoned into the police 44 hotline number. On the 26th of May, the NYPD released a new psychological profile of the killer. It described him as neurotic, schizophrenic, and paranoid, dim store definitions resulting from remote analyses by the psychiatrists. The profile also suggested that the killer might regard himself as a victim of demonic possession. That little nudge from the department would emerge as significant, on a more realistic level than the police profile of the killer. The detectives were trying to trace and test fire the 56 Charter Arms 44 Bulldogs registered in the New York area. This was eventually accomplished, but produced no results. From the starting block, Inspector Dowd ran a nationwide marathon to locate every 44 Bulldog ever manufactured. All 28,000 of them, some 670, had been stolen from Charter Arms and weren't even available for a possible trace. It was a hopeless mission, but was illustrative of the lack of progress and sense of desperation pervading the New York Police Department. The police were scrambling. They had decoy teams necking in parked cars and dummies posed in other vehicles. They were consulting psychics and investigating the thousands of tips received from citizens and other law enforcement agencies. Things were not going well. It was time for a little encouragement. On May 30th, Memorial Day, encouragement was dropped into a mailbox in Englewood, New Jersey. The box was located in proximity to a large apartment complex in the affluent suburb, which was just a few miles across the George Washington Bridge from Upper Manhattan. Specifically, the mailbox sat on the corner of Myrtle Street and Lorraine Court, something the police were privately able to determine because, on account of the holiday, the letter was hand canceled at a local postal substation. The envelope was addressed to one Jimmy Breslin, the Count of Queens Boulevard and controversial columnist for the Daily News. At 47, Breslin was a success and not undeserving in many respects. He was a colorful, earthy man of the streets, writer, and a good one. He'd authored a number of well-received novels and would later become familiar to many Americans for his self-caricature in the Peel's beer commercials. It's a good drinking beer, he would observe, cigar in hand, but notoriety bred a degree of pomposity, and some said a touch of journalistic ambivalence. Breslin, a crime aficionado, had taken a keen interest in the son of Sam slayings and produced a number of his trademark pounding the pavement with the cops' columns about the investigation. He was also well plugged into the Omega Task Force. When the letter for Breslin arrived at the Daily News building on East 42nd Street in Manhattan, the paper milked it for several days with teasing, circulation building articles before finally making its contents known. When ultimately published, the notes set off an explosion throughout the entire metropolitan area. More than anything else, the Breslin letter set New Yorkers spinning, sleuthing, and trying to solve the case. The reason for this was simple. The missive contained 4 aliases of the killer, names which triggered hundreds of leads into the public mind. Beyond the clues, the letter was a chilling masterpiece, graphic, flowing, and literally bubbling with vivid imagery. It was the work of a creative, intelligent writer. It was mailed in Inglewood, but as its opened lines said, it really rose from the gutters and the dank, mist-shrouded back alleys and entrails of the city, and from the deepest recesses of the human brain, from which the most horrifying nightmares ooze. Hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Hello from the sewers of NYC, which swallow up these delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks. Hello from the cracks in the sidewalks of NYC, and from the ants that dwell in these cracks and feed on the dried blood of the dead that has steeped into these cracks. JB, I'm dropping you a line to let you know that I appreciate your interest in those recent and horrendous 44 killings. I also want to tell you that I read your column daily, and I find it quite informative. Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th? You can forget about me if you like, because I don't care for publicity. However, you must not forget Donna Loria, and you cannot let the people forget her either. She was a very, very sweet girl, but Sam's a thirsty lad, and he won't let me stop killing until he gets his fill of blood. Mr. Breslin, sir, don't think that because you haven't heard from me for a while that I went to sleep. No, rather, I am still here, like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please Sam. I love my work. Now the void has been filled. Perhaps we shall meet face to face someday, or perhaps I will be blown away by the cops with a smoking 38 calibers. Whatever. If I shall be fortunate enough to meet you, I will tell you all about Sam if you like, and I will introduce you to him. His name is Sam the Terrible. Not knowing what the future holds, I shall say farewell, and I will see you at the next job, or should I say, you will see my handiwork at the next job. Remember, Miss Lauria, thank you in their blood, and from the gutter, Sam's Creation 44. Here are some of the names to help you along. Forward them to the inspector for use by the NCIC, the Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, the 22 Disciples of Hell, John Wheaties, rapist and suffocator of young girls. P.S. JB, please inform all the detectives working the slang to remain. P.S. JB, please inform all the detectives working the case that I wish them the best of luck. Keep 'em digging, drive on, think positive, get off your butts, knock on coffins, etc. Upon my capture, I promise to buy all the guys working on the case a new pair of shoes if I can get up the money, Son of Sam. And this was what he left, that little looks like Mars, Venus, and some other types of things I'm not familiar with. On the back of the envelope, in the same professional style of block lettering, was written, Blood and Family, Darkness and Death, Absolute Depravity, 44. Beneath that was the Son of Sam graphic symbol. It was one hell of a return address and was withheld from the public. Besides the accomplished printing style, the Breslin letter incorporated techniques normally used by someone familiar with graphics, such as centering and hanging indentations. Once the letter was published, the police phones rang off the hook. People were turning in journalists, artists, draftsmen, cartoonists, men named John, boys nicknamed Duke, and the police themselves arranged for a screening of a Scottish film, The Wicker Man, which revolved around druid sacrifices in flaming wicker baskets. The police said they believed the graphic symbol of the letters and utilized the universal sign for male and female, Mars and Venus. This was incorrect. The symbol had its origins with 19th century occultists, Eliphas Levi, and the signs were actually the astrological renderings of Mars, the god of war, and Venus, the goddess of Roman sewers, who were also known as Placida. 3 weeks later, Judy Placido of Wickerman Avenue in the Bronx was celebrating her graduation from St. Catherine's Academy, the same high school attended by Valentina Suriani a year earlier. Judy, 17, didn't know Valentina, but a friend of hers did. And another fact that would be kept confidential, Judy had attended Valentina's funeral with the friend. The 44 caliber world was certainly a small one. On Saturday, June 25th, Judy, in the company of 3 girlfriends, drove across the Whitestone Bridge from the Bronx to party at a Queens discotheque named Eliphas, which was located on Northern Boulevard in the Bayside section. Eliphas, a Latin word, means elephant. In the occult, the elephant is the demon behemoth, a reference contained in the Son of Sam's April letter to Captain Borelli. The implication is clear and significant. It was a warm, rainy night, and the combination of the inclement weather and mounting fear of the 44 killer turned the normally overflowing Eliphas into something of a wasteland. The night dragged on, but by 11 p.m. the crowd increased somewhat, and it was then Judy met Salvatore Lupo, 20, a gas station attendant from Mespeth, Queens. Lupo, with a styled haircut, a mustache, a love of sports, and a flair for disco dancing, was immediately attracted to the vivacious Judy, who herself was a sharply pretty girl with long wavy brown hair and an enthusiasm for the disco scene. Judy, who lived with her aunt, was the youngest of 3 children. Her mother had died of Hodgkin's disease 9 years previously, and her father subsequently remarried and kept a home nearby with his second wife. At 2 a.m., Judy's friends agreed they'd had enough of Eliphas. Judy, however, decided to stay and continue her getting acquainted effort with Lupo. Lupo's friend Ralph Sacante was a bouncer at Eliphas and had driven Sal there that night. Lupo informed Judy that Sacante and he would drive her back to the Bronx if she wanted to wait until the disco closed. After talking about the situation with her girlfriends, Judy consented. At 3 a.m., after another hours of dancing and conversation, Lupo showed Judy the keys to Sacante's maroon 1974 Cadillac and suggested they wait in the car until Sacante finished for the night. The auto was parked about 2 blocks from Eliphas on residential 211th Street near the 45th Road intersection. Hand in hand, the young couple left the disco and walked directly to the Cadillac, entering and began to talk. A few minutes earlier, witnesses spied another caddy, an older one, gold in color with a black vinyl roof and rear end damage, slowly cruising the neighborhood. A white male in his 20s or 30s who had short black hair and a thin mustache was behind the wheel. Inside Sacante's car, Lupo and Judy lit cigarettes while they conversed, and Lupo, who was in the driver's seat, affectionately eased his right arm around the back of Judy's neck, and they passed a quiet 10 minutes. Ironically, their conversation turned to the subject of Son of Sam, and the Son of Sam decided to join in. The first shot, aimed at Judy's head, shattered the front passenger side window, smashed Lupo's right wrist, and hit Judy in the neck. It continued downward, exited her neck, and embedded in the seat cushion. A fragment of flying glass sliced into Lupo's right leg. Lupo dove below the front seat, looked toward the window, and was able to see the gun, which kept spitting red flashes. The second shot hit Judy in the head, but miraculously only grazed her skull, penetrating the skin and traveling along the surface of her forehead before settling just above her right eyebrow. The next missile pierced Judy's shoulder and, like the first shot, deflected downward and slammed into the cushion. The barrage was now over. Lupo flung open the car door and fled toward Eliphas, trailing blood from the gash in his leg. Judy was left alone in the Cadillac, stunned and not knowing she'd been shot. Judy sat dazed for several minutes before staring into the rearview mirror and seeing she was covered with blood. Now, overwhelmed by panic, she crawled from the caddy and stumbled along 211th Street, trying to focus on the distant lights of Eliphas. At the corner of 45th Road, her strength was drained and she collapsed in the rain-soaked street. Quickly now, the neighborhood came to life, and Judy was soon draped with a blanket as a concerned crowd gathered. Police and ambulance were immediately summoned, and Lupo, after telling the Eliphas doorman about the shooting, returned to the fallen Judy. Minutes before the shots rang out, an unmarked car containing Detective Sergeant Joseph Coffey and his partner drove from the neighborhood. Hearing the radio call, the two furious cops hastily sped back to the scene. The three blocks south of the site, a witness observed a stocky white male clad in dark clothing running along 211th Street, heading away from the shooting location. Another witness saw a well-dressed young man with sandy-colored hair and a mustache jump into a yellow or gold Chevy Nova type of car and leave the neighborhood with the car's headlights extinguished. A partial plate number was recorded, but would lead nowhere. It was believed this man watched the shooting and fled in the same direction taken by the killer, but this information was kept confidential. A similar vehicle was double parked across the street from the scene of Donna Loria's murder in the Bronx. Later, evidence of this type of car's presence at yet two more Son of Sam shootings would be uncovered. At the hospital, surgeons patched up Lupo's wrist and gashed leg. Judy Placido recovered, which was nothing short of a miracle. However, neither she nor Lupo was able to describe the assailant to the police. The headlines following the attack fed massive feelings of fright creeping through the city of New York. Adding to the fear was the fact that the police were admittingly making no progress in the ever-widening investigation. More officers were promptly assigned to Dowd's Omega Force, and in early July, Mayor Beam announced he was allocating even more cops to the case and would step up patrol activity in anticipation of July 29th, the anniversary of Donna Loria's death in the Bronx. In the letter to Breslin, Son of Sam had written, "Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th?" Beam acted in response to that question, but he was criticized for speculation by some, including the New York Times. On the 28th, in a column titled, "To the 44 Killer on His First Death Day," Breslin wondered if Son of Sam would strike, and somewhere in this city, a loner, a deranged loner, picks up this paper and gloats. Again, he has what he wants. Is tomorrow night, July 29th, so significant to him that he must go out and walk the night streets and find a victim? Or will he sit alone and look out his attic window and be thrilled by his power, this power that will have him in the newspapers and on television and in the thoughts and conversations of most of the young people in the city? Two of the city's young people, 20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz and her sister Ricky, 15, were as aware as any New Yorker of the July 29 anniversary. On Thursday, the 28th, the sisters left their home in Brooklyn's Flatbush section and drove to Beefsteak Charlie's restaurant on Ocean Avenue in Sheepshead Bay. Stacy, a petite 5'2", was employed as a color coordinator at the Manila Shoe Corp. Offices in the Empire State Building in Midtown Manhattan, an attractive brown-eyed blonde. She had attended Brooklyn's Lafayette High and Adelphi Business School before landing the job with Manila. Stacy was lively, outgoing girl and had just returned to New York from a Mexican vacation. Her father, Jerry, had met her at John F. Kennedy Airport and was immediately surprised with a box of Cuban cigars she had purchased in Acapulco. Stacy was like that. As she and Ricky conversed idly while waiting for their dinner to be served, a tall young man with dark hair and a mustache approached their table and asked if he could join them for a minute. The two sisters glanced inquisitively at the handsome intruder. Okay, Stacy nodded, and Robert Volante slid into the booth. At 20, Volante was a graduate in Brooklyn's New York Utrecht High School and had been employed at several retail clothing jobs. He lived with his parents on Bay Ridge Parkway and was taking a summer vacation from the menswear business, but planned to resume work after Labor Day. He'd gone to Beefsteak Charlie's with two friends and noticed Stacy and Ricky when they entered the dining room. Deciding he wanted to meet them, he initially focused his attention on younger Ricky, but Ricky realized he was too old for her, steered the conversation toward Stacy, and Volante quickly caught on. Ultimately, he invited Stacy to go out with him. She was attracted to the confident Volante and reasoned that her work in the shoe business complemented his background in retailing. So she agreed to the date, and Volante scribbled down her phone number and address and said he'd call for her at 8 p.m. on Saturday, July 30th. In a suburban Yonkers apartment building high above the Hudson River, a young man named David Berkowitz used the anniversary date for his own purpose. He knew what was in the wind, and he knew how it could end for him. He wasn't sure there'd be another opportunity, so he didn't dare procrastinate. His July 29 celebration would be poignant. Little did he know or think that the letter would be suppressed by authorities. Nearly 4 years would elapse before it came into my hands. This is a warning to all police agencies in the tri-state area. For your information, a satanic cult, devil worshippers, and practitioners of witchcraft that has been established for quite some time has been instructed by their high command, Satan, to begin to systematically kill and slaughter young girls or people of good health and clean blood. They plan to kill at least 100 young Weemon, W-E-M-O-N, and men, but mostly Weemon, as part of a satanic ritual which involves the shedding of the victim's innocent blood. Warning, the streets shall be run with blood. I, David Berkowitz, have been chosen since birth to be one of the executioners for the cult. He who hath eyes, let him see the dead victims. He who hath ears, let him listen to what I say. July 29th came and passed without incident. Yeah, that's it for this chapter.